Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's learning session on preparing for a future of extreme heat, strategic and inclusive heat action planning for resilience. My name is Zonabel Woods, and I'm a senior social development specialist in the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department here at the Asian Development Bank in Manila, Philippines. And thank you for joining us today. It's a Friday afternoon, or maybe a little bit earlier or later where you are, but regardless, it's a Friday and it's right before the weekend. And this session today is really to not only look at a problem, but also to look at some potential solutions to how people, particularly in India, are addressing the challenges of extreme heat. So this session is part of ADB's broader initiative to support Bangladesh, Cambodia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines to better understand and address the disproportionate impact of heat stress on women. And we are working to develop gender-responsive solutions that not only reduce heat's physical dangers, but also its social and economic consequences. Today's session is especially timely as we witness the increasing intensity, frequency, and duration of heat waves across the globe. And as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently pointed out, extreme heat is a new abnormal. These events, fueled by the climate crisis, hit vulnerable communities, especially women, the hardest. So today we are going to ask, how can we use gender-responsive heat action planning to build women's resilience and improve governance in the face of these challenges? So to answer that, we are very honored and happy to have Abhiyan Tiwari with us. He is the lead of the Climate Resilience and Health at Natural Resources Defense Council in India. Abhiyan has extensive background in environment and climate and disaster risk to public health. He has played a really key role in developing and launching South Asia's first heat action plan in Ahmedabad in India, and has since worked with various stakeholders across academia, government, nonprofit to scale heat health adaptation plans throughout the region. He is actually a trailblazer in this field, and I'm just so happy that he's able to share his experiences with us today. So in today's session, Abhiyan will share with us the key insights on the recent ILO report on extreme heat, highlighting the need for effective heat governance. Following this, we will also have a Q&A with our speakers, so please feel free to jot down or put in the chat any questions that you may have as we go along. So everyone, please give him a warm and, I guess, virtual in this case, round of applause. Abhiyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Zoni. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, perfectly. Yes.
Great. I'm just sharing my screen and please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Johnny, again. And I must thank ADB, particularly ADB Gender, initiative that has been keeping the agenda on heat on the front, aligning with the recent call from the UN Secretary General. So I firstly must thank ADB for, although it's not heat in many parts of the world right now, but heat is something new normal. So the summer that we used to, have, let's say for India, for 3 to 4 months is now getting 5 to 6 months extended to. So we'll be having longer summers. So heat should be discussed at any point of time. So I'm glad again that ADB has organized this virtual session, and I'll be talking about our experience with heat, what the latest ILO report talks about, and how we can have, a gender responsive heat action planning, particularly, focusing on women, their vulnerabilities, and how that can be addressed in the heat action planning by cities in different countries. So I come from India. I'm Abhyan Tiwari. I come from India. I work for NRDC India, which is a subsidiary of an US-based organization called Natural Resources Defense Council. It's a 5-decade-old organization that works on the issue of climate change, environment, public health, equity for past 5 decades. In India, our primary work area are climate resilience and health, from where we started our heat resilience heat action plan work. Other than that, we also work on renewable energy, access and growth, cooling and energy efficiency. We work on clean transportation, and we also work on global climate policies and finance issues. Yes, the temperature has been rising, need not to say. This is the, trend of increase in temperature from my own state that I come from, the state of Gujarat in India, which is in the western part of the city. And I appreciate the audience also, if they have not used, this platform, then they should go. The link is there in the slide deck, and I'll be sharing the slide deck. Just go and see how the trend of increasing temperature had been in your particular, local region. But what does this small change in average temperature means? We call it, what would just 1 degree, 1.5 degree, 1.2 degree means? It means there will be a newer climate, so we'll be having more heat and extreme heat days in future. Not in future, we are already having that, right? And which is resulting into the higher exposure of the population across the world. So billions of days people are exposed to across the world to, extreme heat days and heat wave now, which is also resulting into tens to hundreds of thousand deaths, which can be attributed to extreme heat. And that also particularly in the regions that I and most of us come from, South Asia and Southeast Asia. And not just that, even the projections say that in future, more than, by century rather, there will be increase by 370%, deaths that can be attributed to heat. So heat-related deaths are projected to increase by 370% by mid of this century, and this is an alarming signal. So yeah, this is code red for health and era of boiling, as rightly mentioned by the Secretary General of UN earlier. But not just health. Heat is not just affecting our health; it is also affecting our livelihood. Billions of hours of labor are being lost because of the exposure to heat. People are not able to work due to the heat stress, heat strain they are, facing through and exposed to. And largely, what are the sectors which is sectors of economy that is hard, mostly affected by heat? Agriculture. And countries like India, which are agrarian country, are facing the largest burnt of this. So billions of hours of our labor is being lost because of the exposure to heat. Talking about the latest report of ILO, more than 70% of the population, the working population, are exposed to the extreme heat, which is resulting in more than nearly 23 million non-fatal injuries and around 90,000 deaths annually because of the heat exposure at the workplace. But if the occupational safety and health standards are implemented religiously, we can, prevent more than 300, nearly $361 billion if the standards are of OSH standards are implemented religiously on the ground. Talking about the exposure of women, more than 60% of the women, 60% of the worldwide, population which is employed in the workforce are in informal sector. Informal sector has, has the issue of lesser regulation. It cannot be regulated as much as the formal sector can be. in India, it is more than 80%. India's workforce is more than 80% of India's workforce is in informal sector. According to a report by ILO in 2018, 82% of that workforce is women uh, in India particularly, and that too mostly included in jobs like domestic work, construction work, street vending, and others. So that is a concern. When I said, informal sector, they cannot be regulated. And when I say more than 80% of the population, working population, is in informal sector, there is no means to, provide them occupational and health safety standards, services. So that is a concern here. And of those 80% of informal work sector in India, more than 80% are women. So it is again a concern, disparity in the gender. Well, to respond to heat, what did India do? India came up with the first heat action plan in 2013 after a devastating experience of a very bad heat wave spell in 2010 in the city of Ahmedabad, in the state of Gujarat, in the western part of the country in India. The city decided to work on it. So the local municipal corporation, the local urban body, government worked with institutions like NRDC and local knowledge partners like public health partners like Indian Institute of Public Health, Gandhinagar, and developed this first local tailor-made heat action plan and implemented it in 2013. The plan had very simple local tailor-made solutions like implementing the early warnings and interagency coordination, public awareness and community outreach, capacity building of key stakeholders, primarily medical professionals, but then other key stakeholders as well, for example, education department, labor departments, and other, and reducing the exposure and promoting the adaptive measures. Well, when I said public awareness and community outreach, they are two different things. Public awareness is general public awareness, and community outreach is targeted community outreach, the vulnerable, reaching out to vulnerable communities. For example, street vendors, uh, women living in slums, they are particularly exposed and at high risk to heat. So reaching out to them and sensitizing them with targeted messages and information was one of the measures that was taken under the heat action plan in Ahmedabad. And as a result, the city was able to avert more than 1,100 deaths annually after the implementation of heat action plan. This was documented and published in a peer-reviewed journal. And then with the support of the national, agencies, national government agencies, National Disaster Management, Meteorology Department, Health and Family Welfare Department, the plan got scaled to many other states and cities across the country. But that didn't just answer all the questions. We still need to work on vulnerabilities. For example, women are particularly at high risk of heat. The same city where we started our heat action plan, first heat action plan, the city of Ahmedabad, when we went back and looked at the data, did an analysis of 31 year of daily all-cause mortality and weather data from 1987 to 2017, we found that women in particular are at high risk of mortality due to rising temperature compared to men. So this is something that we need to address in our heat action plans. So they need to be, women need to be, gender need to be part of heat action plan from planning to implementation. So they need to be part of the development to the beneficiary. So they have to be at all places. So the latest heat action plan that we recently worked upon, again in one of the western states in the India, the state called Rajasthan and the city called Jodhpur. Jodhpur is a tier 2 city, where we worked with our technical grassroots partner, Mahila Housing Trust, which works closely with the women, women particularly living in the urban slums, to help them improve their housing and livelihood conditions, and help them protect with the climatic hazards. So that organization, Mahila Housing Trust, worked very closely, has been working in the city of Jodhpur for past more than a decade, and worked very closely with the local municipal, government, the local municipal corporation, and they were, doing some pilot work in the city, and were invited by the municipal corporation to develop a proper heat action plan for the city. So that's where NRDC and MHT, Mahila Housing Trust, started working with the local municipal corporation back in 2022, and did a round of consultations, keeping women in the center, in all the dialogues, in all the consultations, and doing, this was first time it was done for a tier 2 city in India, in Rajasthan, a ward level, heat vulnerability analysis indexing, where proportion of women living in a particular ward, percentage of women living in a particular ward was also taken as one of the indicator in this analysis. So we came up with this analysis, and then targeted interventions were deployed. So whichever risk were, wards were at high risk, were given priority in the heat action plan. And this was all done in consultation, as I mentioned, with the women. They had been part of the entire process of from development to implementation, uh, including disseminating the heat health early warning systems to the community. Often what happens, our early warnings come in a language, or in a manner, or in a mode that the local communities cannot understand or may not have access to. But then that was also translated into local language, and the way they can understand. So what is red alert, what is orange alert, what is green alert, or yellow alert, was translated into the local language, has been shared with the community, and the community took the initiative and took it to the each household level, particularly living in the slum, the vulnerable communities. Other cool, other solutions under heat action plan, the solutions like cool roof, which are not just helping the communities to adapt with heat, but also help in mitigating the future heat. So these kind of solutions not just help them in helping them in adapting with heat, but also helps them in reducing their energy cost for cooling. So, and the women were trained to do, implement such kind of solutions, and this also helped them in generating livelihood for them. So those women who are trained in deploying or implementing such cool painting solutions are being paid to do such kind of work in the community in different households. So yeah, those are some kind of solutions that we implemented. Public awareness campaigns being done targeted to women. The community has been in the center, particularly the vulnerable community women has been in the center. Another solution, the first of its kind, a net zero pooling solution that we deployed as under this heat action plan. We piloted it under this heat action plan. I'll quickly run a video of this cooling station. Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the solutions that had been deployed as heat action plan, and the local government, the local city governance is so government is so impressed by all the measures that has been taken as the pilot heat action plan implementation, that they are ready to implement in more of such solutions in the future. And not just that it is deployed, it has been shown, I mean, the effectiveness has also been documented. The the difference in the temperature inside the cooling station from the outside was starkly, more than 10 degrees Celsius in the peak heat hours. Yeah, but the most important part is that countries with effective heat health, early warning systems have 8 times more lesser, mortality rates from disasters. But the point is that we need to implement the early warning systems effectively on the ground. This is again a reflection from uh, a rag picker community, women rag picker community. One of the non-profits in India works very closely with such communities. This is in Hindi, but they held a workshop with a rag picker community, women's in the rag picker community last year summer. And these were the reflections on heat, like how do they experience extreme heat? And these are some of the reflections. I'll quickly read through some of them. And this is very relatable to many countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia, which are, resource constrained or are, low resource. The first point says, पीने का पानी गर्म हो जाता है, पिया नहीं जाता, which means the water that they drink gets hot and they cannot drink it. Now imagine water is the first and most basic essential adaptation measure to cope with heat. If you cannot even drink water because you don't have fridge, you don't have coolers, you cannot buy cold water. So if the water that you have stored gets hot and you cannot drink it, how will you cope with it? नींद पूरी नहीं हो पाती, they cannot sleep and cannot go to work, so they lose their, it's about trade-off between their livelihood and health. So there are many such reflections. I'll not get through all of them, but yeah, I think this was my last slide. So yeah, thank you all, and I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aviant, for your really insightful presentation and reflections on your experience with implementing heat action plans in developing and now implementing heat action plans in throughout India. We can have questions in the chat, so please, for the participants, feel free to type in your question or put up your hand if I can ask you to be brief when you are asking a question. We actually have quite a bit of time for questions, so we have about 30 minutes. And we really want to hear from you. We can try to get to as many questions as possible. But to get us started, I have a few questions of my own. And the first one is around looking at, India's experience with heat action planning. You've highlighted a couple of, important low-cost or easily adaptable strategies that other countries can particularly adapt, particularly those with limited resources. What are some of the others? So you mentioned, this cooling station, which I think it's the design is amazing. And you were talking about earlier how this reduced the heat by 10 degrees, which is incredible. And then the other was the cool roofs. But what kinds of other things are practical, low costs that communities can do? Yeah, so over to you. And we have a number of questions, so we'll get to those after.
Sure. Thanks, Johnny. I think So these are obviously low-cost solutions. The cool roof, for example, passive cooling mechanisms. It could be a cool roof paint. It could be, different tiles which can help. Basically, any surface that can, solution that can help the roof surfaces reflect the heat at a higher rate, which has higher SRI values, can help. So cool roof, green roof, such cooling stations, even increasing the green cover. It takes time, but that's a low-cost solution. It takes time, but that has to be implemented religiously at the community level. See, not everything can be done by by government. Addressing the issue of risk, disaster risk, is all of the society, issue. So all of the society has to be involved into it. I would say that. But yes, I mean, these kind of solutions are low cost and should be deployed at a community level. And government can obviously subsidize it, which many governments are trying to put together in different ways. But yeah.
Okay, no, great. And in the chat, we actually have a question about the cost. So from Bernard Wood. So he's asking, what is the cost of the cooling station that was shown in the video, and does it require much maintenance?
So yes, this was first of its kind, and we piloted it for the first time. We are thinking how would we utilize it during non-summer, days. What would be the utility of it? The cost of development in Indian rupees, this can accommodate nearly 40 to 50 people easily at a time, and has mist fans. I mean, so this was the first model. A lot of R&D can happen. So I'll not stick to the cost, rather I would stick to the efficiency. I'll focus on efficiency. So this is efficient, and my view is how can we make it more efficient, both in terms of providing the thermal comfort and obviously reducing the cost. So this one was, to give a cost to you, it was around 17 to 18 lakh rupees in Indian rupees. And the maintenance has been done through the Mahila Housing Trust, our local partner there, which in fact invested in this entire cooling station. So to me, cost is the second thing. The first thing is what more R&D we can do in such kind of solutions. How can we use? How can we retrofit the existing places? For example, the night shelters and those kind of places into the cooling stations. Understanding the technology. What technology? For example, in this one, the roof is slanted, so the hot air gets lift up, and then there is a vent, so the hot air gets out. The entire boundaries of the wall are covered with the grass shades, and which are sprinkled with the water. The entire cooling center has many fans with water sprinklers, and all this is being powered by solar energy, so it is net zero. No electricity comes from outside. So what more R&D can be done? Should we make more, larger cooling stations and have less number of them, or make smaller cooling stations and have more number of them at many places? So that's the point that we should think about.
Okay. Great, thank you. So now we're moving on into a couple of questions actually on the heat action plans themselves. So my colleague Michaela says, how can we ensure that funding and resources for the implementation of heat action plans are allocated in a way that is both cost efficient, inclusive, addressing the unique vulnerabilities of women and marginalized groups? So and then the second question is, where best do you think should cities start when starting out on their heat action plans? So maybe the first one first, which is, where do we start? But then this and then the question around how do we ensure that there's necessary funding and resources allocated for the implementation?
I mean, these are the questions that we are trying to answer, really. So I have been working on heat for more than a decade now. I started in 2012 and have been working on heat only since then in India, South Asia, across the world. So I'm part of this Global Heat Health Information Network also, which is a joint initiative of WM and WHO. So we need to, and I'm telling from my experience, and this may not be, I mean, I'm giving you my insights. This may not be true for all places, but my understanding is that we shouldn't see heat as a disaster now. Let's not see heat as a disaster, because disaster, despite having said everything about risk reduction, moving from moving from response to prevention and mitigation, risk reduction paradigm, is disaster field is still stick to the response and preparedness level only. But heat is not like other disasters. We cannot, there is no one size fit one thing, and it is going to increase by every passing year. Will not have just 1 week of extreme heat spell, or few days of extreme heat spells. Will have months and months of extreme heat, or increased temperatures. So it is more of a development issue compared to a disaster issue. So we need to see it as a development issue and has to be included in our development plans. Heat action plans should be part of our development plans, be it at city level, state level, subnational level, or at a national level. Obviously, the onus should be as much as decentralized. So it should be at a city level, because it is also an urban, a major urban issue. So cities should own heat action plan, and their heat action plan should reflect in their development plans. So apart from the seasonal adaptation measures they need to work on the long-term mitigation measures as well, and invest into it. And while doing this, gender should be in the center, from planning to, as I mentioned earlier also, who are in the planning process. Are women, being part of, are women and gender being part of the planning process as well? Are they part of the implementation and beneficiary, and as well? So this is in Ahmedabad, we did that. We ensured that while we are planning, women are, equally part of the planning process, from government, from technical partners and everywhere. Whatever activities are planned should be equally distributed with gender, and beneficiaries should, I mean, those who are implementing it and those who are getting benefit from it, the gender should be part of it. So these things need to be thoroughly done through. Yeah.
Just to go back, I think one of the other things, and you showed this in your presentation as well, is, also looking at the question around where should we start? And I think, the assessment part is really critical. So whether it's the physical assessment, so the heat, the hotspot mapping, right, that we need to do to look at sort of where communities are most at risk and more vulnerable, to also entering into this dialogue that you very importantly, talked about with communities that are affected, and particularly women in informal settlements. So I think, those are some of the lessons that we have, drawn from your experience in doing these heat action plans.
True. I sorry, I missed the slide of indicators in that vulnerability assessment. But so when we did this vulnerability assessment, we had, some of the variables in the exposure, indicator, some of the variables in the adaptation and sensitivity indicators. So population of women, percentage of women population in a particular ward was one of the indicators in our sensitivity index indicator. So yes, we considered women in the risk planning itself, and then women led the whole dialogue there. Yeah.
But what about in terms of the whole heat action planning? Because this requires a great deal of coordination across different government departments. So in your experience, sort of what are some of the ways that you have been able to kind of bring everyone to the table and sort of help coordinate sort of everyone's efforts in this regard?
Sure. So as I mentioned, since heat is not been recognized as a topic anywhere, it's not it's not in health programs, any health program, uh, in any country. I mean, by and large, in most of the countries, not in disaster program, not in urban planning programs, urban departments or their programs. Uh, it is important that one, it gets recognized at some place, and then recognized as in one of the department or in one of the vertical, and then have a dedicated human resource to it. Budget obviously is important part, but first part is to have a dedicated human resource to it. So having a dedicated heat officer, chief heat officer, or a nodal heat officer is very important to coordinate all these activities. And that has been the reason for success of Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan. The first, nodal officer, I would call him the first chief heat officer of the world, because he's the one who had been with Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan from 2013 till now. And I mean, he is not a new hired person. He is already an existing senior, health officer, but this was an ad hoc responsibility given to him. And he did a tremendous work, and he has been dedicated to the work. So having a dedicated, heat officer is very important for success of heat action plan, because that is the person who coordinates the activity. So she or her has to be identified, and she or him has to be identified and given the responsibility.
No, I think that's really important. I think the other, I was really struck by your statement that, that heat is not like a disaster, in that we need to stop looking at it as a disaster, but rather as a development challenge. And, we were looking at a map just yesterday, and of where the heat waves have been the worst this year. Majority of them have been in South Asia, but I was quite shocked that Mumbai had 76 days of extreme heat up to May. And Delhi had a streak of 40 days with above 40-degree weather. So we're talking about extreme heat, but even worse, I think, is sort of these long periods like we're having here in the Philippines of just like plainly, hot weather. So how do we sort of change our mindset? Because this is basically the new abnormal, as Antonio Guterres very rightfully said. So we have a couple of more questions here. And there is one from one of our participants, and they ask, were there any challenges in meaningfully involving women in your heat action planning implementation? And which approaches have been most effective at engaging women meaningfully? And are there any lessons for different cultural contexts? If I can also share another question that relates to kind of cultural context, is from Cheren, who asks, thanks for the great insights. Wanted to ask if you face any challenges with women feeling uncomfortable using the cooling stations, especially if men were present. And if so, how did you address those issues to ensure the stations were accessible and comfortable for women? So two questions, one around the heat action, meaningful engaging women in heat action planning and implementation. And the other is, in terms of the solutions, ensuring that women were comfortable in the spaces that were developed and participating in and benefiting equally as men from those.
So I'll answer the first question first. So challenges are more cultural, right? In terms of, for gender, the challenges are more cultural. It is not about, the system. For example, those who are, working on heat action plan, let's say an RDC or the Male Housing Trust or the local government, working on heat action plan and providing the women, local women, community, women from community an opportunity to be part of it. It is about their house, their family, giving them, uh, opportunity or giving them access to be part of it, and not just heat in general to all other issues. So if they are done with that challenge, they are okay to be with us. Luckily, the grassroots organization that we work with, Male Housing Trust, is driven by women, and they are helping alleviating women, both culturally, financially, socially. So the challenges still remains in terms of how much of amount of time they can provide, how much of amount of effort they can provide. But frankly telling you, they have done much better work than it would have been a man-driven work in the Jodhpur heat action plan particularly. So challenges do remain, but at a household level, I would say, not after that. It remains after that as well, but the first challenge is at a household level, and it is all society, culture, and how your culture and which culture and society you come from. So I'm specifically talking about that place only, and that city only. But other than that, I don't see any major bottleneck that I can explain, because they have done tremendous work. So I don't say, once they have, once they have liberty to take actions, I think women can do much better work than men. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have a question from another colleague, Labisha. I don't know if you want to ask your question, Labisha. If you are online, you want to turn on your camera and ask your question? I'll just give you a minute. If not, I can just ask the question for you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I thought the audio setting was turned off for this. Hi, Abhiyanji, very interesting presentation. I just had a question because I was also researching heat action plans for the TA that you're currently presenting for. So there is a 2023 paper by Trahan et al. That looks into Ahmedabad heat action plans. Maybe you're aware of this. And they look at the communication strategies used by this Ahmedabad HAP, and they find that because a lot of women did not have access to phones, or even now don't have access to phone technologies in Gujarat and Ahmedabad, etc., this reduced the capacity for them to attain heat-related information. And other strategies that you tried out, for example, apart from in-person communication channels, what other strategies would there be that would enable women to access information better? That's the first question. The second is, I think there are a number of versions of the Ahmedabad HAP, if I'm not incorrect. So I'm guessing that there has been periodic evaluations. How are these evaluated? And are you thinking of piloting any new strategies to strengthen the effectiveness of the HAP? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Labisha. These are very important and very pertinent questions, rather. So yes, not just mobile. So and the city realized. So I'll rather answer your second question first. So how is being evaluated? So one of the outcome from the evaluation in the initial years of the heat action plan that came out was that initially the city was only using their, traditional mean, I mean, the city government was using the traditional mean of communication, which is press release, right? So in the evening, they will give a press release to the government press, department, and they'll circulate it to the press. So wherever that goes, it goes to print and electronic media. That's it. But then they realized this is not, I mean, during the evaluation, it came out that this was not enough. Not everyone was receiving it. So then different means of communications were used. So, phone, using WhatsApp, using social media, using radio platforms, FM radio channels, um, using honking through the auto rickshaws, the tuk-tuk, in some places we call it tuk-tuk auto rickshaw. So doing honkings through auto rickshaws, providing the alerts and warnings in the local, obviously in the media, television, and also through the community, health workers, community field workers. So different means of communications were used, but your point is very much right. Despite all this, the last mile connectivity remains a challenge, and that's where the city, I mean, the heat action plans should focus on improving upon, because those are the ones which are most vulnerable. So they are trying to do that. One of the latest, development, which is not, this is, I'm just saying off the record, is that they're trying to decentralize it. City is divided into 48 wards. They're trying to decentralize the heat action plan. Every ward should have, their own targets, their own, monitoring and evaluation framework, and that should ultimately, come to the main nodal officer. So they have been trying to implement a lot of innovations in the heat action plan. About mobile phone penetration, I agree, but that's more or less the same across the country. In fact, Ahmedabad or India, Gujarat has higher penetration of mobile phone network, including access to women. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the data recently, but I think I strongly think that Gujarat and Ahmedabad has higher mobile phone penetration, network penetration. Yeah.
So I have a couple of other questions, Abhiyant. So beyond heat action plans, what other policy interventions or strategies do you believe are essential to building long-term resilience to heat stress, especially for women and for other vulnerable populations?
I mean, see, there are other policy measures that has also been taken, which are complementary to heat action plan. For example, in India, we recently came up with a first statewide cool roof policy in the state of Telangana. The state of Uttar Pradesh is coming up with an urban cooling policy, which is not just looking at the the roof, but other surfaces as well, to be covered as passive under the passive cooling solutions. But targeting it to women, we need to understand the challenges of women, right? So where are they exposed most to the heat, and then what kind of solutions could be provided to them? I see Ujjwala Yojana, uh, which is a, a scheme initiated by the federal government in India that provides access to to the LPG cylinders to the women, which reduces their exposure to air pollution. But that also helps in to some extent reducing their exposure to heat, because heat and air pollution combined are increases the risk to health. So I see those kind of initiatives which can target to women, and access to access to toilet, right? We had this another scheme called Swachh Bharat, under Swachh Bharat Mission. I forgot the name of the scheme, where the government, deployed millions of constructed millions of toilets in the households. So when I'm saying this, this is a cultural angle of heat. Even women living in Joni, I mentioned this in the gender forum last time when we met. Even women living in, coming from the well-off, part of the society, tend to remain themselves dehydrated during when they are traveling because of the lack of access to the safe or clean toilet, right? And pardon me if I'm wrong. Because if they do not have access to clean toilet, they'll not, keep hydrate themselves enough. And if you do that, if women are doing that during summer, that puts them at high risk. So getting an access to safe and clean, toilet itself is a measure that can reduce the risk of heat stress or heat related, health outcomes for women. So there are many ways we can look at the heat, and that's why I said that is a development issue and not a disaster issue.
It's an urban planning issue as well, right? So it's about building codes and green spaces and all of these other things that will help reduce, the impact of the heat island effect. So yeah, no, I think this is quite critical. But the great thing about the heat action plans is that it's an umbrella, right, for starting the conversation, one, and starting the process, but it's also an umbrella to bring everyone in, whether it's like the health sector, urban planning, the conservation people, together to work and try to each come with something to the table to address extreme heat. So I think that's why, the idea of having a heat action plan is so important. So one last question, because we're running out of time, and I don't know if I don't see any other sort of posted questions, but if you have a question, this is kind of your last chance. But one of the other questions that had come up is you talked about some of these solutions also being a source of livelihoods for women. So like the whole cool roofs. And I love that about this example, because we're developing solutions that have sort of multiple benefits. And this is such an important, co-benefit, right? It's creating jobs for women, essentially. So what other things might be out there, whether it's being done or not, where you think in this heat action planning process may actually result in sort of income generating opportunities for communities, maybe not necessarily just for women, but for communities?
I mean, of course, this was one, and then many, let's talk about, for example, for rural, rural settings, where they even have, lack of access to energy, providing them energy solutions, distributed renewable energy solutions. One of the flagship programs that NRDC India is doing with rural communities, again, working closely with the women living in the villages, in the rural households, is providing them suite of solutions, distributed renewable energy solutions at household level, from household to community level, and then training them for those kind of solutions, providing them solar panels, solar lights, solar fans, uh, 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 irrigation pumps, and training them to manage that, and and making them the market player. They are trained to fix it, they are trained to buy it, they are trained to sell it, and they are trained to fix it if any damages or any malfunctioning happens in those equipments. So there are many ways we can help women in bring both resilience to heat and livelihood.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to close off, I think you know, there are some people on the call today who are just ourselves included, the gender team, who are just about to embark in supporting the development of heat action plans. So what would be your sort of key advice to us as we get started in this process?
Sorry, I missed the first part. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. There's some people on this call that are involved in just starting to work on heat action plans with our development partners or our developing member countries. And so, and including, you know, ourselves, the gender team that's working on this technical assistance project. So what would be your advice to us as we get started on this process? The sort of
Build
the
partnership.
person. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. Are you done? Should I answer?
Yes, yeah.
So build partnership of local institutions, local knowledge partners, which understands the gender as well. It's good if you have an organization which is technically sound and also, you know, driven by women or is a gender, for example, male housing trust that we have. Luckily, we have. We also work with SEWA very closely, Self-Employed Women's Association. So this rural Green Village program that I was just talking about is through partnership with SEWA. So build partnership of local institution and local government, and then initiate the dialogue. So let all these, you know, be part of the process, entire process. Do pilot demonstrations, let the local government. Ultimately, our aim should be that the local government should own the heat action plans. They should own the heat action plan. When I say they own the heat action plan, they need to invest into it. They need to budget for it, and they need to, you know, deploy resources for it, both human and whatever other resources are required. So build partnership, and then when I said partnership, government should be part of it, and local institution do pilot demonstrations and show the success results to the local governments, you know, the policymakers, the politicians, and then they'll take it up, because heat is not an issue that anyone can get rid of, at least in the government in the coming time.
Thank you.
So
Thank
they'll
you
have to
very
work.
much. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a very, very good advice, very sound advice. So thank you very much, Sabian, for sharing your experiences with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us. A recording will be available also. And we are very happy to have everyone sort of join us next time. So watch out for our next learning session. And in the chat, my colleagues will also put some links to some resources from ADB on this issue. So thanks again for joining us, and happy weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you.